Who here has heard of Daniel chapter 3 and the events that we just read of before? Who here has heard of it all before? Okay, so many of us, of course, the very famous account of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, as we will go on to read in the verses, the golden statue, the fiery furnace, and then this mysterious fourth figure who later appears. Now, yes, some of us have heard of this passage, have studied it since childhood. Some of us perhaps do have a vague memory of it somewhere in the back of our minds. Yet, I dare say, some of us here this might be the first time that they have heard of this account. But wherever you are when it comes to this very well-known, in some circles, passage of Daniel, let me just say from the outset, it is not a children's story. All right? It is not a children's story. There is so much more it's about so much more than just three brave men who do ultimately refuse to bow. It is that, but it is so much more than that. It's much more about power, fear, worship, control. It's about what happens when the future God reveals is not the future that we would have chosen for ourselves. After all, last week in Daniel chapter 2, what did Nebuchadnezzar see? Who remembers last week? What did Nebuchadnezzar see in Daniel chapter 2? He saw a dream. That's right. He had a dream. And in that dream was the future. Right? He saw a great statue made of gold, silver, bronze, iron, and clay. And Daniel told him what that meant. Babylon was the head of gold, this glorious, powerful, impressive head of gold. But Babylon would not last forever. Other kingdoms would come after it. And in the end, God would establish a kingdom that shall never be destroyed. That was the dream. That was the vision. That was the future that God revealed to Nebuchadnezzar. But what happens when Nebuchadnezzar does not like the future that God reveals to him? What happens when God's future feels like a threat? What happens when a king decides to take matters into his own hands? And what happens when God's people are commanded to bow before a future built on fear, pride, and control? Well, that's what Daniel 3 is all about. Daniel chapter 3. And as Jim read for us just a few moments ago, Daniel 3 opens with Nebuchadnezzar building this image of gold. Right? As you do. Verse 1 tells us that the image was about 6 cubits wide and 60 cubits high, which is roughly 2 to 3 meters wide and about 27 meters high, so around 7 or 8 stories tall. Which means that this thing was enormous, right? It was enormous. But it was also very thin, only 3 meters wide, 8 or so stories tall. So Nebuchadnezzar built either a very tall and very thin statue, skinny statue, or perhaps he built a very large pedestal with some kind of image or statue on top. Either way, whatever he built, it was huge, it was ginormous, it was made out of gold, it was meant to be seen from very far. In the ancient world, of course, statues and monuments were not mere decorations. They were declarations. They declared power and glory. They honored kings and gods. They were about telling the people who was in charge. So this image was not just a ancient artwork. It was political as much as it was religious. It was, as historians like to call, imperial theatre. Imperial theatre. Nebuchadnezzar was gathering his officials of his empire after building this incredible golden statue and saying, look at this. Look how marvelous this is. Look how marvelous I am. Now bow down to it and prove to me that you are truly loyal to me. Prove to me where your allegiance lies. And so, of course, he summons the governors, the prefects, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, right? All of the officials of Babylon, right? Everyone important, everyone with influence and responsibility, everyone who mattered in Babylon's political machine. The entire leadership structure of the empire gathered before this golden statue. And as the reading went on, when the herald cries out, when the music plays, the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, every kind of music, everyone must fall down and worship this golden statue that the king had set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship is immediately thrown into a burning fiery furnace. No pressure. No pressure at all. I mean, talk about an intense worship service. An intense worship service. Welcome. We're going to stand for our first song, and if you don't, you're all going to burn. Right? That's what he was basically saying. That's basically what was happening here. It was forced worship, forced allegiance, forced conformity. That's where we got up to in the reading. But of course, the account goes on. Not everyone decides to bow. Not everyone bows when the music plays. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they do not bow. Now, do we remember who they are? Their Hebrew names are Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. We first met them in Daniel chapter 1. They were captured along with Daniel and given Babylonian names taken from Jerusalem and trained along with Daniel in the language and literature of the Chaldeans. That's the astrologers. And in that first chapter, they were placed under enormous pressure to be reshaped according to the values of Babylon. But as we saw a couple of weeks ago, they resisted that pressure. They resisted that pressure and remained faithful. But now as we go to chapter 3, the pressure intensifies. The pressure rises. It's no longer about will they or will they not eat food from the king's table. It was now about worship. It was now about idolatry. It was now about the first 2 commandments of the 10 commandments. You shall have no other gods before me, and you shall not make yourself a carved image. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. So there was no 2 ways about this for dear Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. This was not a grey area. This was not something that they discussed. Oh, should we do this just as a once-off? Should we do this, but God knows where our heart truly lies? God will understand. No, the instruction was clear, and they knew exactly what was being asked of them. They were being commanded to give to an idol and to a king behind the idol what belonged to God alone. And so they refused. They refused. And of course, someone noticed. Some of the Chaldeans came forward, verse 8, and maliciously accused the Jews. Now, I think that word maliciously is very important, very much matters, right? It wasn't just a neutral report. It wasn't a report, oh, by the way, king, just so you know, so-and-so and so-and-so didn't follow your instructions. No, these were people who were evidently jealous of the 3. After all, if you remember at the end of chapter 2 that we looked at last week, Daniel was promoted after those events. And these three were likewise promoted and were appointed over the affairs of some of the provinces of Babylon. Right? These three Jews were elevated in the empire. And evidently not everyone was quite happy about that. And so they had some enemies who saw an opportunity. They came to the king. There are certain Jews, they say, who you appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. And what do you think Nebuchadnezzar did? Was he cool with it? No, he was furious. Furious. How dare they? Verse 13 says that he summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to be brought before him in this furious rage. But interestingly enough, he decides to give them a second chance. And he says, in effect, perhaps there's been a misunderstanding. Let's do it again. We're going to play the music again, and we're going to give you another chance to bow down, to see if perhaps you didn't hear the instructions right or something, right? He gives them a second chance to prove themselves. But if it turns out that it's true, off they go to the fiery furnace. He ends with this. He comes to the end in verse 15. He ends his charge to the three with this. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands if you do not bow down in the end? Who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Right, Nebuchadnezzar thinks he holds life and death in his hands, doesn't he? He thinks his power is ultimate. But of course it is not. And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego respond with perhaps one of the greatest statements of faith in all the Old Testament. Verse 16, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter, they say. In other words, we don't need any more time to think about it, right? We know our decision. Verse 17, if this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But, verse 18, if not, if he doesn't, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. This is what I like to call their challenge accepted moment. Their challenge accepted moment. Not an arrogant, dramatic, attention-seeking moment, but rather, okay, king, you're challenging us to bow? Challenge accepted. And we ain't going to do it. No. No, our God is able, they say. Our God can deliver. Our God may deliver. But even if he doesn't, we're not going to bow. We are not going to bow. Church, that's what maturity in the faith looks like. That is what maturity in the faith looks like. Faith that trusts God's power without presuming anything. Faith that knows God can rescue but does not make obedience conditional upon anything. Faith that says God is good if he saves me from the fire, but also says that God is good even if he doesn't. They are displaying mature faith. But before we go on, we need to understand something. We need to understand why Nebuchadnezzar built this image in the first place. I think some of the time, most of the time, so many of us are familiar with this passage that we jump over that question and we just assume. But why did he build this image in the first place? Why a golden image? Why now? And to answer that, we need to go back to Daniel chapter 2. Because remember, in Daniel chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar had seen what? A huge image, a great statue, a frightening statue, a statue with a head of gold, chest and arms of silver, middle and thighs of bronze, legs of iron, and feet partly of clay and iron. And Daniel interpreted the dream for him and said, "King, you are the head of gold." Right? Babylon is the head of gold, was this glorious, powerful, impressive head of gold. But the point of the dream was that Babylon will not last forever. Another kingdom will come, another kingdom will go. And then in the days of those kings, the king of heaven, the God of heaven, would establish a kingdom that shall never be destroyed. Right? That was the future that God revealed. Human kingdoms rise and fall. Babylon will rise and fall, but God's kingdom will come and endure forever. And at the end of chapter 2, it seems like Nebuchadnezzar understands the dream, doesn't it? It seems like he accepts it to a degree. Right? After all, at the end of chapter 2, he fell down on his face. And he honored Daniel, and he even confessed that Daniel's God was the God of gods and the Lord of kings and the revealer of mysteries. It looked like a wonderful ending. Nebuchadnezzar learned and accepted the dream. But evidently not. Because now we turn to chapter 3. And what is Nebuchadnezzar doing? Building this giant statue that he saw. Only not the head of it being gold, but the whole thing. The entire image of gold, head to toe, top to bottom, all gold, as though to say, Nebuchadnezzar saying, "No, God, that's not what's going to happen. Babylon's going to last forever. I'm going to last forever. My kingdom won't give way to another. Babylon will not be replaced. Babylon, this great Babylon that I have constructed, will last forever." In other words, what we see here in Daniel, in chapter 2, God revealed the future. But then in chapter 3, Nebuchadnezzar did not like that future. He did not like it. He saw it as a challenge. He was being challenged. And now this is Nebuchadnezzar's challenge accepted moment. He saw it as a challenge. And he's like, you know what? Challenge accepted. I'm going to make sure this kingdom of mine does not ever fall. And so when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to bow, Nebuchadnezzar does not see them as merely just 3 men disobeying an order. He sees them challenging his authority, challenging his kingdom, challenging the future he was trying to build. And that's why his rage became so extreme. Verse 19 says that the expression on his face changed, right? His face was distorted with anger. And he orders that the furnace be heated 7 times more than what it was normally heated, which is just another way of saying, make it as hot as you can. Make it as hot as you can. And he commands mighty men from his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Mighty men, not weak men, mighty men to tie them up. Warriors to tie them up so they could not get out. And they were thrown into the fiery furnace, a furnace that was so hot that it killed those who threw them into the flames. I wonder if you can see what Nebuchadnezzar was doing here. He was trying to make a rescue attempt impossible. He was trying to make a rescue attempt impossible. Bound tightly, right? He wasn't taking any chances. Bound tightly, thrown in quickly, furnace overheated. In his mind, there was no way out of this one. Remember what he said earlier? Who is the God who will save you from my hand? The answer, at least according to him, no one. No one. But then suddenly Nebuchadnezzar looks into the furnace and is astonished. Verse 24, he rises up and says to his advisors, did we not cast 3 men into the fire? And they say, true, king, of course we did. What are you talking about? And then he replies, but I see a 4th man unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they're not hurt. I see a 4th man unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of this 4th one is like a son of the gods. Who is this 4th figure? Well, Nebuchadnezzar says he looked like a son of the gods. And later on, he describes, he calls him an angel sent by God. Some wonder whether or not this was the angel of the Lord, or perhaps a pre-incarnate image of Christ. Maybe not. We can't know for sure. But what we do know for sure is that God was with his servants in the fire. No, he did not keep them from the furnace, but he met them in the furnace. And so Nebuchadnezzar comes near the door of the furnace and cries out, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. What did he call God, the Jewish God? The Most High God. This was the king who had just built this incredible golden image, claiming superiority over all gods and kings. Now he's calling the Jewish God the Most High God. The king who once asked, who can take you out of my hands? What God can deliver you out of my hands? He now realizes, oh, this God can. This God can. The Most High God can. And when they come out, everyone gathers around them. The governors, the king's advisors, they all see it. And not a single hair is singed. The cloaks are not burned. They don't even smell like smoke. You know how you go to a bonfire and you go home and you can still smell the bonfire the following day in your clothes? No, that's not what they had here. They did not even smell of smoke. God accepted Nebuchadnezzar's challenge. God accepted Nebuchadnezzar's challenge. This was now God's challenge accepted moment. Not by destroying Nebuchadnezzar, not yet, but by preserving his faithful servants, by exposing the emptiness of this king's power, and by showing that no furnace, no empire, no idol, no decree, no threat can ever fully overcome the God who holds all things together. So, church, here in this passage, we have seen 3 challenge accepted moments. 3 challenges and 3 challenge accepted moments. Nebuchadnezzar accepted the challenge to defy the future God had revealed. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego accepted the challenge to remain faithful. And God accepted the challenge by meeting his servants in the fire and showing that he and he alone is the Most High God. But what about us? What is the challenge that this passage brings before us? Well, the first challenge is the question of, will we bow? Will we bow? Now, no one is making a 27-meter golden statue on the Tweed coast. At least not that I know of. I don't think that's what they're doing over there at King's Forest. And I haven't been to Pottsville recently, but I don't think that's what they've done down there either. I don't think that's what's happening here. But it does not mean there aren't other idols. There are plenty of idols, church. Comfort can be an idol. Approval can be an idol. Security can be an idol. Money can be an idol. Family expectations can be an idol. Political power, an idol. Personal preference can become an idol. Anything we give ultimate allegiance to, anything we trust more over God, anything we obey, even when obedience to it means disobedience to God, can be an idol, is an idol. And so the question is not simply, will we bow? Nor is it, would I have bowed if I was in their shoes? All right, I'd like to think, we probably all like to think, we wouldn't have done that. We would have joined Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But the question I want to ask for us this morning is, where are we already tempted to bow? Where am I tempted to compromise because faithfulness to God might cost me? Where am I tempted to stay silent because speaking the truth might bring on some heat? Where am I tempted to go along with something else because I don't want to stop and stand out? Where am I tempted to give Jesus part of my allegiance, but not all of it? Daniel 3 does not call us to be obnoxious. It's not calling us to be rude. It's not calling us to go out looking for the furnaces, right? Looking to prove ourselves. Look how brave we are. But it is calling us. It is a call to faithfulness, quiet faithfulness, courageous faithfulness, obedient faithfulness. Faithful enough to say, our God is able. But also faithful enough to say, but if he doesn't come through on this thing, not my will, but his will be done. That is mature faith. That is mature faith. Allowing God to be God and saying, not my will, but yours be done, whatever may come. So will we bow? The second challenge is similar. Will we seize control? Will we seize control is the second challenge. Because as much as we like to put ourselves into the shoes of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, sometimes we need to place ourselves into the shoes of Nebuchadnezzar. Because sometimes we wear his shoes more often than not. We need to recognize that we often can act as he did. So when the future feels uncertain, we try and seize control. Some of us fight, some of us withdraw, some of us become anxious when the future feels uncertain. Some of us become controlling. Some of us grip tighter and tighter onto whatever it is that makes us feel safe. Some of us, when the future feels unsure, when we're not in control, we, in our own way, try to build golden images of a future that we prefer. This is what I want for my family. This is what I want for my finances. This is what I want for my work, for my children. These are my plans. Come, look at them. Marvel at them. And we think, if we can just take control, if I can just take control, if I can just manage every variable, if I can just protect what I'm afraid of losing, if I can just force God's hand a little bit into the direction I want it to go, then I can secure my future. But Daniel 3 reminds us that the future does not belong to any one man, and certainly not to us, but to God. It belongs to God. And this is deeply relevant for us as a church during this Vision Month. Throughout July, we're praying, we're listening, we're walking. We're asking God to lead us for the next season of our church life. And it's exciting. I don't know if you've seen the vision board this morning. There's exciting stuff up there. There's exciting stuff that's been placed on the hearts of God's people that starts coming to light. But it also can be very uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. Because if God leads us, He might lead us somewhere we don't actually want to go. Lead us somewhere we don't expect. And church, if our church grows, as we looked at a few weeks ago, things will change. If God opens new doors for mission, things will be stretched. If God brings new people, new generations, new needs, new opportunities, we may need to surrender some things that we would prefer to keep. And so we must be careful not to be like Nebuchadnezzar, not to do what he did. We must not say, God, show us the future, and then build an image of the future that we want. We must not say, God, lead us, please lead us, while quietly saying, God, lead us exactly where I want to go. We must not cling so tightly to what has been that we refuse to work faithfully towards God, what God might be calling us to be and become. Now, please hear me clearly. That does not mean that all change is good. Does not mean that every new idea comes from God. It does not mean that everything that's placed on that vision board will come in actuality. What it means is that we need wisdom, we need prayer, we need discernment, we need to test things, we need to listen to the scriptures, we need to listen to one another, we need to be led by the Holy Spirit together. And when we do that, we will sit under God's will, the one who holds the future in his hands and the one who promises to be with his people no matter where they go. And that is ultimately the great comfort of Daniel 3. Not simply that God can rescue us from the fire, right? And he can. He sometimes does. The deeper comfort, though, is that he is with us, no matter where we are. that he is with us no matter where we are, in the fire or elsewhere. So when the pressure comes, church, the challenges for us are, will we bow? Will we seize control? Or will we trust the God who reveals mysteries, the God who rules over kings, the God who meets his people and is with them wherever they go? So, church, Daniel 3 began with a king trying to make his kingdom golden forever. It continued with 3 faithful servants refusing to bow. And it ended with the Most High God proving that he alone rules over kings, kingdoms, idols, futures, and furnaces. So my encouragement for us this morning, in addition to the challenges that we've looked at, is may we not live in fear. May we not live in fear. May we not bow down to the idols of this age. May we not build our own statues thinking that if we do, we can control things. But rather, may we trust, may we remain faithful. May we know that whatever we might face in life, whatever fire that might come our way, we believe in a God who is there with us and will never walk away.